All right, we're now going to discuss ethics in journalism. So, what is on your mind?
Yeah, the lack thereof, and I think in the last week we've gotten another demonstration that journalism around the globe is falling into the toilet.
Well, can you be a bit more specific?
Well, let's go through the list here. There was the coverage of the anti-Trump rally and protest.
All right, what about it? Did
Well,
the horrible Trump supporters go out and assault a bunch of minorities?
for the most part, no. Oh, the anti-Trump protesters were unruly, caused a bunch of damage, and were not what you'd consider a peaceful protest. Trump was ironically the only person that walked away from that not looking like a massive asshole.
Well, the word I've been receiving from various outlets is that the Chicago police felt that they had things under control and that Trump only showed up because not enough people showed up for it to be worthwhile for him to go there.
That is utter malarkey.
Well, that is the story which is going, well, one of the stories which is going about.
Yes, that is one of the stories that is going out, but that is not backed by the video footage of the canceled Trump rally and the video footage and statements of the anti-Trump protesters themselves.
That's true. They have, well, various things to say, but most of the time they do accuse the Trump supporters of attacking them and attempting to rip down their signs and spitting on them.
Yeah, accuse is the key word there. The police had immense trouble keeping control of the situation and arguably lost control at times. And as I'm aware, there was property damage and the whatnot.
Well, the police deny that. The Chicago police are saying that everything actually was under control. They had the situation under control, and they did not advise Trump to cancel the rally.
Well, yes, and now we get into the reality wars because video footage shows one thing. Now, technically, yes, the Chicago police did not tell Trump to shut off the rally. At the same time, it's been, I believe, indicated, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Secret Service, who are responsible for Trump's personal security, wanted the rally shut down, or at least Trump not to be in that area because it was getting dangerous.
Well, there is a story that the somebody in the Secret Service on Trump's detail did say they were concerned that there weren't enough of them there to be able to do their job under the circumstances. But that has not been confirmed, and the Secret Service, I don't believe, have officially commented.
All right, but still, the amount of violence at the anti-Trump rally has been glossed over, and all the problems have been blamed on Donald Trump.
No, some of the problems have been blamed on his supporters.
Okay, also on his supporters. This is not fair coverage of the anti-Trump rally.
Well, I have to admit, the coverage of the Trump rally and the counter protest is not exactly what you would expect normally to see of a political rally which is effectively forced to close by protesters.
Yeah.
But the press hates Trump. And he's American Hitler, who will possibly bring us to World War III.
Yeah, also, he's not Hitler. His statements, while you can argue are racist, he is not blaming minorities for all of America's problems. He does not say that illegal immigrants are responsible for all of America's problems. Hell, he doesn't say China is responsible for all of America's problems. The closest he comes to is blaming the government officials for making bad deals and being stupid.
Yes, but he's going to make better deals and take all our jobs and back from those countries.
Yes, regardless of how unrealistic his promises are, he is not blaming minorities and singling them out. He is at most asking for a stop to immigration and saying that people of certain religious beliefs should be watched.
Well, he's going a bit farther than that. He wants a temporary ban on all Muslims being able to enter the United States.
Yes, he is also saying that. I'm putting that in immigration, but regardless, still,
look,
this
he
is bad.
is bog standard nationalists, basically fascist rhetoric.
Yes, he can be lightweight fascist, he's nationalist, but that doesn't make him a Nazi.
Well, not literally. But also, yes, you are getting into the fact where effectively the press seems to be colluding with the left-wing fascist equivalent of attempting to shut down the speech of somebody they disagree with.
Yeah, shut down the speech of someone they disagree with. And after months of talking about how people shouldn't call for like the assassination of political leaders, from actually years, I should say, of criticizing the Republicans for running an ad where they'd have Barack Obama in the crosshairs, or just recently where someone was arrested for indicating that he'd like to kill Justin Trudeau on a train and he was arrested for it, or just the death threats on our own Premier Notley, suddenly with all the death threats for Donald Trump, suddenly that is okay.
Well, after all, there's been all these death threats against them, and effectively nobody's been arrested. If it's death threats against people who maybe deserve to die.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. The press is supposed to try and present an unbiased view of the world. And even if they can't be unbiased, they're supposed to provide a consistent view, not, well, what is effectively when someone we like is even being indicated that someone might want to assassinate them, that person should be condemned and arrested. If, however, it's someone we don't like and someone's indicating they want to assassinate them, well, that's all well and good. They're pushing this idea of free speech for us. That's where they're completely forgetting that a fight years ago about when talking about gay rights to have public discourse about it because people were trying to argue that you couldn't discuss homosexuality in public because it wasn't a family topic and it needed to be kind of censored because it's about decadence and, well, possibly homosexual rape, and you're not allowed to talk about it. And it's controversial. Now, they're basically pushing for the speech they don't like to be shut down.
Well, naturally. You want to get rid of the bad speech and keep the good speech.
Yeah, and who gets to decide what's bad and good?
Well, they do, obviously.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Well, they've been appointed. They are the guardians of reality to inform everybody of the truth and what needs to be known.
But they're not informing people of the truth.
Well, a truth.
Not even a truth at this point. I mean, and then just the other incidents, like on the other side, from the left-wing side, the bullshit Bernie Sanders has had to go through. Like I've talked about it before, with how heavily the debates have been skewed against him to the point of, well, ridiculousness, and just even things like this article in the New York Times. Actually, I should say that this was being reported by the Rolling Stone, where they're reporting that an article that was published Monday in the New York Times that was positive towards Bernie Sanders. It was positive. It was talking about his legislative record and how he was able to go across the floor and work within Congress and was able to achieve things. And then within hours, it was edited blatantly to make it sound like an anti-Sanders article, because the New York Times isn't able to have any bastion of pro-Clinton rhetoric.
Well, I have to admit, for last-minute editing, which is usually just correction of facts, this was rather blatantly changed the tone of the article. I mean, the article wasn't entirely positive about Bernie Sanders, but it was largely positive, to one which was largely not positive.
Yeah, they took out important quotes, put it in awkward paragraphs changed the title. Like,
yeah, they made him go from an effective individual legislator who may not have achieved any huge changes to the system to an ineffective legislator who just sort of collaborated Republicans to do little changes around the outside and occasionally frustrate Democratic administrations.
Yeah. No, this is pretty bad, to be quite frank. Like that level of editorial bullshit. Like, I'm sorry, like the New York Times used to be the gold standard of journalism in the world.
Well, let's be careful here, because technically this is not actually news reporting. This is an editorial. So legally and arguably under certain standards of ethics, they are allowed to skew it any way they feel like, since it is not listed as a news story, but basically opinion. It is more an indication of their biases that they would not allow an editorial opinion in their paper which diverged that much from their mainstream editorial opinion.
Well, it's even worse, actually, because authors do have their own following to a certain extent, and people recognize certain authors and inherently trust them. It's clear this author was positive to Bernie Sanders, and then they decided to basically make him anti-Sanders to, I guess, trick his audience into thinking he was against Sanders.
Well, we don't know who exactly did the rewrites. I mean, they could have actually, although it's unlikely, made the original author.
No, they didn't. That was made clear in the Rolling Stone article on this. Although, to be fair, in the Rolling Stone article, they did state that when they asked the writer for a comment, the writer said, well, it's the digital age, and if my editor wants to edit the article this extent, who am I to say no? And that's not an exact quote. That's paraphrasing.
Yeah, now that I try to recall the article, I think, yes, that was what he said.
Yeah.
So, yes, effectively his voice was altered.
Yeah. Like, look, this is opinion making. This is the New York Times, the gold standard of journalism, effectively selling out to the Clinton campaign, where they're not going to allow dissent in their opinions, and they're going to report stories in a certain way, which, dare I say, are only going to be positive towards Clinton.
Well, the New York Times editorial board has been getting more and more politically active over the past few years in just outright supporting certain positions and opposing others.
Yeah.
Now, the fact is, as long as their news coverage in the rest of the paper is actually good and unbiased, it shouldn't be that big a problem. It's just a question of whether they've managed to keep, or at least limit their bias in their actual coverage of events.
Yeah, but then we're going down that dark road, right? And we're no longer talking about how, like, again, like, newspapers are biased. There's going to be a slant, even if just deciding what story you're going to put forward as important and which one you're not, right? The New York Times has always been left-leaning, but has tried to make an intellectual effort to put forward what story they believe is truly important, regardless of politics, and reports things in a consistent manner. And that's starting to drop. Like, and like, if this was the only thing, like, I wouldn't be as worried as I am. But we've already seen previous in the year, like the whole Cologne incident.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, effectively, the major outlets like New York Times, BBC World News, and, well, pretty much all the major press establishments seem to have selectively edited their actual news coverage when it comes to things like, the Cologne incidents, and also their coverage of certain countries, like Poland.
Yeah.
Because effectively, all of the major news outlets, heck, even The Economist, which previously was known for being a relatively unbiased, well, no, they definitely have a sort of loose capitalist bias, but a relatively good international news source, published some remarkably unresearched articles.
Yeah.
Well, I'm being charitable there. I'm presuming they're remarkably unresearched as opposed to just, well, lying. About the situation in Poland, Eastern Europe, and the immigration situation as a whole. I mean, there's definitely bad actors out there in those governments and countries who are not being, well, really honest about their intentions, but making stuff up doesn't, in the long run, help your case.
Yeah. Like,
Also, pissing off an entire country, well, it's not a particularly good idea. Sometimes you need to do it, but you should make sure you're actually blaming a country for something they're actually doing before you blame an entire nationality.
pretty much, yeah. Like, again, like, I know, like, the Polish government, for example, is bad. Donald Trump is an extremist, and I would say a lightweight fascist. Bernie Sanders is also an extremist. I do not really share the viewpoints of any of these three people. And
Actually, I was a little disappointed when Bernie Sanders didn't actually make some sort of statement, although disagreeing with Trump and Trump's point of views, but condemning attempts to shut down political speech.
Yes.
Instead, I mean, he hasn't outright backed the protesters, but he came about as close as he could to it.
Yes, he did. But regardless, I don't like either of these things. And I think if you report on them fairly, yeah, you'll do all the damage you need to do. However, they've gone far beyond that. They're demonizing Trump supporters and the whole of Poland to a point that is going to have serious repercussions for the future. And Sanders supporters are feeling massively disenfranchised and are right to feel that way.
Well, also, the fact is, while they may not have noticed it because it was sort of going on anyway, they have effectively set an extremely bad example for the rest of the world's governments and press organizations. Because you'll notice that, I mean, as I say, this may have happened in any case, but the amount of press censorship in the world is starting to go up at an alarming degree.
Oh, yes.
And most of the time, news, well, basically propaganda pieces like the Russian media conglomerates have effectively been saying, look what the Americans and the European press is doing. See, we're no worse than they are. In fact, we're possibly better than they are. At least we're reporting on these things that they're not reporting on, even though you know who we speak for.
Oh, yeah. No, they've totally gone that route. Like, heck, with Turkey taking over Zaman newspaper not too long ago, that was one of the arguments made for why it's okay for the government to take over Zaman, the largest newspaper in Turkey.
Well, and also a voice which was actually opposing the government on certain issues.
Yes. And also, in the long term, it's not a smart move for journalists in the West to begin with. Like, this was like, there is a non-ethical reason to try and be consistent in your coverage and not do bullshit like this. It's because the government will eventually come and smack you down.
Well, that's the thing. If you are revealed to be blatantly biased, then there's no reason for when the government changes to one which is hostile to your bias for there to be any effective opposition to them closing you down or taking you over.
Oh, yes. And, well, even just the media in many countries enjoys an amazing amount of privilege is more than in any period in human history. Yeah. And we have Trump already talking about, and probably even rightfully so, well, changing the laws so you can more easily sue the press for their bullshit.
Well, you can sue the press now for things you can actually show or well, it's really hard actually to prove that they know it's bullshit.
Yeah, it's hard, but if Trump is already talking about changing the libel laws, you have in Canada the CBC, which has now become Justin Trudeau's propaganda piece, living in fear because if the Conservatives take back power, they're going to liquidate the CBC. This isn't even a question, I think, at this point. This is a reality.
I don't know. They're going to need a little more cause. Right now, the majority of Canadians still vaguely think of the CBC as a good thing, even if they don't watch anything that it produces.
Yeah, but as the immense amount of pro-Justin Trudeau rhetoric, regardless of what reality is, keeps coming out of there, eventually the Conservatives aren't going to care. A good portion of the NDP isn't going to care, and more people are just going to get flat out sick of it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. The people who should be pissed off at the CBC aren't the Conservatives. The CBC completely screwed over the NDP in this last election. Then again, actually, other people who should be pissed off at the CBC is actually the Liberal voters themselves, since the CBC blatantly interfered with their leadership race.
arguably, but yeah. And you have the other things in Europe where, again, the press has been given a lot of privileges. As things like Cologne happen, they're risking a lot of those privileges, as we might see a massive turnaround in who's running those countries.
No, that's the thing. I mean, even your enemies, if they think you tell the truth, will listen to you. But once your enemies don't think you're telling the truth, they're not going to listen to you at all.
No, they're not.
And effectively, the right wing of Europe has learned that they cannot trust the center and center left press to tell them the truth about what's going on. So they're left with their various conspiracy sites to tell them what the truth is that's going on.
Yeah, which is a problem. Like, as much as I am a supporter of the alternative media and YouTubers, they do not have the resources, and a bunch of them are bullshit machines.
Well, even if they try not to be bullshit machines, there's a limit to how much research they can actually do into a story before they go with it. And they're going to make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. And if they're honest, they'll fess up when they find out they've made one. But that's always a difficult thing, to get yourself to first believe that you've made a mistake and then admit it in public where people are going to yell at you.
Yes. Now, I mean, like, eventually there could be some consolidation of the alt media into sites like Breitbart.
Well, there has been some. I mean, they've definitely picked up a bunch of people with varying views around their core beliefs.
Yeah,
but the whole point of alt media is it's a whole bunch of diverse voices who are now able to just yell out into the void and occasionally have people listen to them.
Yes, but that's the thing. This is still decades in the future, and we're looking that we are currently in a dark age of news where it's becoming harder and harder and harder to determine what the truth is.
Oh, we're just sort of going backwards in time. The fact is, in many ways, the previous era of news, basically the post-World War II through to the, beginnings of the 21st century,
very recent.
Was a remarkably good period for the news and for objective journalism. Most of the time, most news outlets have been somewhat biased. Many of them have been propaganda pieces, and the scandal sheets and gossip sheets have always been the most popular news sites.
Yes, but I do not know of a period when the press was, the modern press, I should say, has been this bad since the age of jingo journalism, which led us into things like the Spanish-American War and, to a point, World War One.
Yes, actually, the press bears a lot of responsibility for World War One, actually.
Yes, they do.
And that's the democratic press there.
Yeah.
And in fact, the controlled press of the states of Germany, Russia, and Austro-Hungary were actually far more subdued in their calling for war. It was actually the press of England and France which were pushing really hard for the war.
Yes.
Well, not all of the press, just a large amount of them.
A large portion really pushed for war and lied their ass off in the lead up to World War One, and then were lying their ass off during the war, partly because the government was forcing them to, and partly because they felt they needed to, up until about halfway in the war when some of the soldiers were coming back from the front lines, and you started to truly grasp how horrific the war actually had become.
Yeah, no. In many ways, World War One was a huge wake-up call to the press, and then they reorganized themselves, shifted blame to the governments and the losers. Although there's a fair amount of blame which does actually go to losers in that war, but still. But they did reorganize them.
I'm losing you there, Ian. I can't hear you.
We're breaking up a bit there.
Can you hear me now, Ian?
Yes, that's perfect. That's good.
Okay, I can hear you too. I don't know what happened there. Anyways, keep going.
I sort of finished my point.
Okay, I didn't hear your point to the end.
All right. I was saying how after the end of World War One, the press effectively reorganized itself into a more objective press corps while diverting blame for the course of the war off onto the various governments, especially that of the losing countries.
Yes. Yes.
Which is not to say that those losing countries did not actually have a fair share of the blame for World War One. It just wasn't all of the blame.
But they at least reorganized themselves. They were not nearly as bad for World War II. And after World War II, they also learned some hard lessons. We had a pretty good era of the press.
Yes, no, we've had a very good era through that basically 60-ish year period. And now it's coming to an end.
For no good reason.
Oh, yeah, there's no good reason whatsoever. Effectively, Western democracies still rule the world. They are, although the economy has been somewhat crap for the past decade, there is no real reason that the press has to descend into jingoism other than the fact that there's this threat of new media out of the internet and publishing costs. And they seem to be unwilling to fully embrace the changeover to a web-based format, even though it would massively reduce their costs and actually make it a lot easier for them to cover international and far-flung issues and events.
Yes. No, like I wish I had an explanation for why in recent times they've gone this far. But unfortunately, I don't.
It's mostly fear, and the grass is greener on the other side. In some ways, you can actually blame Fox News for this, in the sense that Fox News looks like it's so successful with a format which is very news light, that all of the left-wing media are believing their own propaganda about how powerful Fox and successful Fox News is, and in their desperation to keep themselves economically afloat, they've decided to copy what they think Fox News is. In other words, their worst interpretation of it.
So your belief is that they've sold their souls to the devil.
In a secular sense, yes. They have seen the evil which works, or at least what they believe is the evil which works, and have attempted to replicate it for themselves. They've either descended into sort of BuzzFeed clickism or just outright pandering, or a combination of both. And even the New York Times and the BBC and The Economist and Le Monde and Der Spiegel have all descended from their heights to engage in this kind of behavior because they see it as possibly the way to save themselves and keep alive the remnants of their business model.
And totally forgetting where this route in history takes us.
For the most part. But as I say, there's a lot of fear there. They've watched a lot of their colleagues lose their jobs.
Yes, they have.
Although arguably there's more journalism and journalists out there than there have ever been in history. Although the quality may not be that great.
Yeah, the quality really is not as great as it once was. The quality is really not there. But, well, that's your theory. And you know what? You're probably right to a certain extent. Uh, the best theory I have, and it has its own flaws, or I guess I shouldn't say flaws, is as speculatory, is that the most of the press really has been left leaning for a bit, and left wing politics in recent years has just become so much more radicalized, where there seems to be this insane movement, which actually, is sort of kind of like your theory, where they've seen what the or what they believe the right wing has done, and they believe they have to do the same thing, appeal to the same extremes, and also they have to work more and more in unison and mobilize all of their little organizations to achieve their goals, like and now you're getting bizarre things like gay rights groups, which you'd think should only be about gay rights issues, protesting Israel in solidarity of the Palestinian people, when Israel has some of the most liberal gay rights in the world. And Palestine, I believe the penalty for being gay unofficially is death by stoning.
Actually, I think the official penalty is death. They just try not to do that too much in public.
Yeah.
Because that would make their donors feel icky.
Yeah. And this whole intersectionality and this mobilization, it's ridiculous, and a good portion of the press has been caught up on it, and you see things that people and the press are supporting like you'd never have imagined in a million years they'd be supporting, like Anita Sarkeesian's new bullshit videos on women in history.
Look, it's easier to identify with and report on and talk about groups and communities rather than dealing with the intricacies of individuals and individuals' desires and preferences. That's always the great appeal of tribalism, and to a certain extent fascism, is that you just generalize about a community, which communities are good, which communities are bad, and that way you don't have to deal with the individual cases or the individuals that you are hurting.
Yes. So it's perfectly all right to throw gay people that might be Muslim under a bus in order to protest Israel.
Well, that's also the interesting thing I've noticed in the press lately. Lately, there have been the occasional press articles about rising anti-Semitism in Europe, focusing on, their problems with the Muslims and possibly fascists and, the bad parts of Europe. But there's a massive rising tide of anti-Semitism on the left inside the United States and Canada.
Yes, there is.
And for that matter, Western Europe. And it's going almost completely unreported.
Yeah.
I mean,
go on, sorry.
Yeah, it's getting quite blatant. There are actual organizations which have effectively sort of pushed out the Jews. And there is various university anti-racism, groups, talks, and even professors giving lectures that they don't want to be recorded and released to the public, which effectively, while purporting to be against racism, are effectively anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Blaming the Jews, I guess, for being the arch racists. Now, you can make some definite cases that the state of Israel has some racist policies, and even that its existence is somewhat racist. But that's not a reason to attack Jewish people or to exclude Jewish people from the conversation.
Yeah, no. There's no reason to do that. And Jews are, even if you have a problem with a certain sect of Judaism or the Jewish state. They're not a monolithic freaking force. There's a bunch of different sects of Judaism. There's a whole slew of political parties in Israel. And they're effectively collectively blaming all Jews for what they don't like.
Well, that's effectively the core of their social stack and their identity politics, is all Jews are the same. All Jews have Jewish privilege. All Jews can be blamed for what other Jews are doing.
Yes.
Which is essentially racism.
Yes, it is.
It is the very core of racism. The fact is, no matter how you cut it, intersectional politics is racism.
Yes, it is.
Even if it's that sort of passive sort of we're trying to be good and help out those people who are disadvantaged kind of racism, it effectively is racism. It's the rebirth of racism with a sort of Western lefty skin on it.
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of gender politics thrown in there as well, of course.
But
essentially, yes, it is group identity. The fact is, whenever you break anything down to group identity, you're basically dealing with prejudice. Because the fact is, there are Jewish people who don't care about Judaism. There are Jewish people who don't care about money. There's always going to be individuals who defy the prescriptions of their particular group. But if you effectively go with intersectional politics, you have to ignore all that and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah. You have to pretend it doesn't exist and do things like paint all white people with the same brush, because clearly the historical experience of Poland is going to be the same as France.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing which a bunch of Eastern Europeans are being pissed off about, because their history of slavery is being slaves. As opposed to, admittedly, Western Europeans who, although during the Roman Empire, they often ended up being slaves. And, well, there's the whole serfdom situation. But after that, they essentially were the people who were enslaving other people, for the most part. And occasionally each other. So, yes, but no, they're tied up in their own particular politics and their own particular obsessions about why one group is bad, one group is good, why they can feel better about themselves or better about their actions because they're only persecuting people from a bad group while helping people from the oppressed group. Even though sometimes the people from the oppressed group are the oppressors and sometimes the people from the oppressing group are the oppressed. It all depends on the circumstances, but nobody wants to deal with individual circumstances. They don't want to put in the effort as journalists or as activists, or even sometimes as government officials, to figure out that there are individual cases, and sometimes they're different from what you expect.
Pretty much, yeah. Which used to be one of the hallmarks of liberal and left-wing politics, that we are individuals and people do have individual experiences.
Oh, it is the hallmark of classical liberal politics. The thing is that the left wing in the West is no longer liberal.
No, there's something else.
Which is sort of a problem, because you have this sort of rump left of left-wing liberals and this small community of right-wing liberals, and then you have the two more politically active communities on the right and the left who are not liberal at all.
No, they are not. And yes, now this is becoming an enormous problem, and I'm not sure where it's heading or how to stop it.
No, it has to burn out of its own initiative. It's already doing incredibly stupid things. The problem is this has coincided with a period where the press isn't bothering to report these incredibly stupid things. Look, the fact is, people usually end up siding with the liberals, not necessarily because they agree with them, but because they don't want to be the one who's on the chopping block at some point. People side with free speech, not because they like all speech, but because they don't want their speech to be taken away.
Well, yes.
But if they think they can get away with censoring other people's speech while keeping their speech, then there's a large number of people who will suddenly decide they like the virtues of censorship.
Yeah, there is. However, that's kind of a thing where you think people would have the wisdom to realize what happens in history when you do that.
Well, first they'd have to know history.
Yes.
Look, the fact is, the schooling system, and this is down to faults on both the left and the right, has effectively become more and more genericized and removed of all content. They don't want to exclusively teach white European history because that's colonialist. But then again, they don't really want to teach all the horrible things about other people's history either. And it's better just not to teach that much history in general. And then the right wing wants to remove anything which is anti the state, and the left wing wants to remove anything which is too, well, might give people the wrong ideas, or possibly remind them that the world was a much more gray place in the past than we occasionally like to think about. And so effectively, the schools have responded to these pressures and the various initiatives by effectively turning Western education into a gray pack of muck that nobody in their right mind would be that interested in learning anyway.
Yeah, and as a result, you have a bunch of people not realizing the lack of wisdom of what they're doing and thinking this is going to turn out fine in the end.
Well, that's the thing. They need to at least teach the parts of how democracy came into existence, how it really screwed up, how it was replaced, and eventually came back later on, so you have an understanding of how your own government system and what its flaws, failures, and successes are.
Yes.
Might be also nice to teach your economic system. And, well, the fact is, look, the Western system is currently the dominant one in the world. Well, it's a good thing to teach Chinese history and Indian history. Really, you need to concentrate on starting off with Middle Eastern history, Greek Roman history, and then European history. And that doesn't matter where you are in the world, because that's the history which is currently impacting you now.
Yes. And they're not doing it, and as a result, it doesn't seem the journalists realize in the press what is going to happen to them as they go down this path, when we will likely have several changeovers of government that will be less forgiving to them.
Well, that's the thing. If things go on the way they are going and people don't pull themselves around, we're going to have a bunch more, authoritarian parties taking over, even in things that we currently think of as lovely Western democracies.
Yeah.
And they're going to do mean things to people.
And when the press really has an important message they need to get out and try and convince people of, people aren't going to believe them.
Well, why should they at this point? I mean, seriously, there's certain things, if they report on, a flood or an earthquake, you can believe them. But when it comes down to, let's say, a terrorist incident in Turkey, how can you be really sure who was responsible for that terrorist incident in Turkey?
Yeah, at this point, how the heck can you be?
Or if there's, some sort of riot or conflict in which two sides were beating the crap out of each other, you can't really trust the press to tell you which side started it, which side attacked who.
Nope.
Whom, I think.
No, you can't trust them at this point. They've lost that trust, and eventually they're going to have problems not having that trust anymore. We've already seen it with the right wing, with how Fox News has been completely unable to stop Donald Trump's rise.
Well, the problem there is, as I say, they've always been newslight, and not even their own viewers have taken them that seriously. They do have the occasional actual news program and actual reporting, and some of them actually are serious journalists, but when they're mixed in with the sea of the rest that Fox News puts out, calling it news, it's hard really to take any of it so seriously you'd actually do something about it.
Yep. And now they can't stop Donald Trump, and the Republicans' best hope is a broker convention where they can somehow agree on someone not being Trump being the nominee when he will have close to half the delegates.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, the Republicans have put a lot of effort into making their primary process as democratic and swift as possible. And this has ended up with them effectively not having that much control over their own process. So a charismatic figure has jumped in and effectively hijacked their party.
Yes, but if people could trust Fox News, they could have torpedoed Trump a long time ago.
Well, yes, the fact is he has occasionally said things which are truly nuts. And things which indicate that he doesn't have a very firm grasp on reality.
Yes. But people can't believe that now, can they?
Well, or those things get overshadowed by other things.
Yes. But yeah, and the left and the other side of the press has gone down that dark road.
But yes, I think if we're going to do
beat it to death, yes.
Well, first we should probably go into what we're actually talking about briefly. The fact was, Donald Trump seems to believe that certain businesses of his, which have either failed or been bought out and are owned by completely different people, are still run by him. At least he's willing to say so in public about Trump Wine and Trump Steaks.
Well, yes. Well, just the bizarre thing. Like, Trump had this press conference after one of his wins, and Romney made those jives, like, what happened to Trump Steak, Trump Airline? And then he had this bizarre press conference where he had on a table, like, steaks he claimed were Trump steaks that were still being sold, and Trump Wine in a vineyard, produced from a vineyard he claimed was owned and operated by him still, was debt-free, and dared journalists to check it out, and well, that wasn't true, and Trump steak hasn't been sold for a while. It still has some of the wrappings from the local butcher. So you have to believe either that Trump is a pathological liar to somehow believe the press would believe him.
Or didn't care.
Or didn't care. B, he actually believes, as Ian has been saying, that these businesses are still owned and operated by him and are truly successful. Or C, he is basically just flat out nuts. Or combination of the above.
Well, yes, either he's a huge liar, insane, or is so lost touch with his own empire that effectively his yes men around him are just telling him that he still owns everything.
Yes, and he doesn't, he's probably been having Trump steak for dinner every night, thinking it's come from his personal cows, only for his son or one of his minions to just be going to the local butcher and getting a AAA grade steak for him to eat.
Yes, no, something is seriously wrong there. But then that was completely overshadowed by somebody a journalist getting their arm bruised.
Maybe.
Possibly by the Secret Service, possibly by a Trump campaign staff manager. And then the whole riot coverage. Where effectively it's gone from a story of, is Trump actually insane, to a story of, why is the press making shit up about Trump?
Yep. No, No,
Because-
they had what they needed to destroy Trump to his supporters. That whole press conference was so completely bizarre, and there's only 3 possibilities, all of which are bad. They
Well,
just
also, this actually calls into question his actual sanity. This isn't just him bullshitting about stuff and being the big man. This is, he doesn't seem to understand what reality is.
yeah.
I mean, this was an actual example where he is actually doing something which he should know that everybody else knows isn't true.
Yes. And instead, they decided to run a self-indulgent series of bullshit on if the Breitbart reporter was manhandled by Trump's campaign manager or not, and what the video coverage of it was, and then look at this riot that Trump this not riot that Trump is in fault for.
Well, I mean, the fact is, it might even be the case that Trump's campaign manager was being a huge asshole. The problem is they were so circuitous about the actual evidence, with photogs actually denying they were there, even though they were credited with being there, and were in a location where they should have seen everything and recorded everything which was going on. And then at some point, they eventually released footage from a different angle, which might possibly show that their original story was true, maybe.
Oh, the worst thing about it was, from my own experiences in the past, right? Incidents like that are not abnormal. Like when you're in a scrum of press trying to get one question of theirs answered, or record someone else's question being answered, and you have a scrum of press, you have security guards, and you also have crowds of supporters around. People get minorly injured, people get pushed to the side. That is a fact of life.
No, yes. The fact is, if you're pressing in on a candidate as they are leaving to attempt to push one more question on them, you can expect to be shoved around by security and, frankly, the other press.
Yes. No, this happens. This happens all the time. Just some of the journalists try to make a big deal out of it because of this narrative that Trump and his campaign staff are thugs, to try and push it.
And yes, but the problem is, in the process, they've effectively overwritten the news story that Trump is possibly senile.
Yes. They overrode the far more important and terrifying story that Trump may be suffering from dementia or senile, with a attempt to portray his campaign manager as a thug, where at worst any professional would just go, well, this is generally normal for a press scrum situation like this, and oh well, like,
Yes, they went to an issue which is all about them, the press, but is not something which will hurt Donald Trump much at all. Well, in fact, the fact is, even if his campaign manager did shove a member of the press out of Donald's way, that won't really hurt Donald Trump's campaign, over an issue which actually was worrying people who are supporters of Trump, that Trump really might be everything people are saying he is.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah. No, if they wanted to get rid of Trump, that was their chance, and they freaking blew it for being self-indulgent.
Well, to be entirely fair, the fact is, the rally in Chicago and the bizarre handling of it would probably have done a lot to overwhelm the story in any case, because that has definitely boosted Trump's support.
Yes.
But yeah, no. Look, the fact is, while the Republicans certainly can share some blame for the rise of Donald Trump, frankly, the press has a lot of blame for the rise of Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, they're the ones that have given him all the press coverage. They're the ones that haven't been able to show where some of his policies are actually nuts, or show times when he actually has been nuts. They're the ones that have been self-indulgent, and they're the ones that have also ignored other very viable candidates. Like right now, it seems the best shot at an anti-Trump candidate is John Kasich, who I personally would think was a serious and would have made a great presidential candidate, but really never had that much of a shot because the press kept ignoring him.
Well, he's an uncharismatic troll. He's also very earnest, one of those sort of good believing Christians who wants to help everybody and is constantly saying, "Oh, shucks, let's all try and be nice to each other." He's basically a nerd. He is one of those geeks in school that you avoided at the lunch counter because you didn't want to look like you were one of the unpopular kids.
Mm-hmm.
And they pretty much, they borderline no platformed him for the first few debates, which he whined about in a very, once again, uncharismatic and nerd-like way.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that he, of all the candidates, especially as far as domestic policy goes, has pretty much the best record of everybody running for president.
Yes.
He's just, he's the person who would be off by himself or with the other losers in the lunch table of junior high, which is where apparently the press exists.
Yes, but he would have made a great presidential candidate. Another reason why Rubio's campaign failed as hard as it did was just he wasn't able to get any traction with the press until recently, because the black hole that was the Jeb Bush campaign was sucking up all the air that wasn't going to Trump.
Well, to be fair, the Jeb Bush campaign and its utter failure was a real news story.
It was a real news story, but there's a certain point where you have to say this guy is in polling higher than 3%. Maybe we should start introducing the Americans to the guy that's polling a little bit higher, this fellow named Rubio.
Yeah, no, they should have, and there was lots to push in on Rubio. In fact, some of the good things about him and also some of the not so good things about him.
Yeah, but a lot of that came rather late.
Oh, yes, no, it came all of a sudden, sort of an almost incoherent rush when suddenly it became obvious that Jeb Bush was gone and Rubio was the only sort of charismatic mainstream Republican candidate left to oppose Trump and Cruz.
Yes,
and now his campaign is dead.
Yeah, his campaign's dead. No, that's the thing, right? They tried to pick winners. They were wanting Jeb Bush to be the winner, and he was getting a good amount of press coverage. They were going for Trump as a clown and giving him a ton of press coverage rather than really policy-serious candidates like Rubio and Kasich, and actually also I'll say Christie as well. And then as the campaign went on, they then give flashes of attention to certain candidates like Carla Fiorina because she's a woman.
Fiorina,
yes, because she's a woman. And then they gave Ben Carson attention because he's black. And only towards the end, they gave the serious policy candidates any real attention, and it, by that point, was well past Super Tuesday.
Yeah, And as a result, it's very likely they won't even be able to have a brokered convention. It'll simply be Trump as the Republican nominee, and they either have to back him or have a third-party candidacy.
Yep. Well, even if they have a broker convention, like getting all of them to agree on a candidate, an anti-Trump candidate, is practically going to be impossible.
Oh no, that could be hashed out. The party people can sort
They
it
have
out.
they have to hash something out with no one crossing over to support Trump, and they have to please people like Ted Cruz, who will have a bunch of delegates and want things.
Yes. Now that will be the problem, because effectively, if they want to have a successful brokered convention, they will need Cruz's delegates to agree on a candidate.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
And Cruz is going to really want that to be, well, him.
Yeah. And they don't want it to be him.
No, they don't. I mean, in many ways, Kasich is sort of the bog standard functionary who often wins out in these kind of brokered conventions, but that's going to presume that the entire non-Trump vote decides they just have to pick somebody.
Yeah, which is going to be a problem.
Yeah, it is. However, it's going to be really interesting. I just wish there was a press source I could watch, which I could be relatively sure was going to cover it in an unbiased way.
Yes.
Well, I have to be fair. The fact is, the PBS NewsHour, while it has allowed its personal biases to creep in more than it has in the past, still makes every attempt to cover things in an unbiased way when it comes to U.S. politics and things they actually know something about. They're just not that good about other things.
But again, maybe I'm going to make this same point crystal clear as one of the last points. But again, the press has always been biased. Usually, you can be pretty sure what the bias is. The thing, especially ethically, is the thing is you have to be consistent. If you are going to condemn Group A for issuing death threats on a political candidate, you have to condemn Group B, even if you're sympathetic to them, for issuing death threats. You need...
I don't think consistency is the word you're looking for here.
Look,
there is actually journalistic ethics. It is actually a taught course. And
yes,
while it cannot eliminate bias, the whole point is to attempt to limit your own bias. Consistency is actually, if you're a Hillary Clinton backing paper, you back Hillary Clinton no matter what happens, what she says, what she does, or what anyone else does or says.
All right, but this is what I'm getting at. This is the difference, right? Look, you try and eliminate bias, but the thing is, one, you state what your bias is, or at least indicated what it might be, so people are aware of it. But still, you are consistent in things like condemnations and what you find is wrong and what you find is right. You do not, and you do, for whatever point, you tell the truth. You do not.
There is no the truth. There is truth as you see it. And also, you don't know your own biases. And stating your biases off the hop is something you do in an editorial. It's not something you do when you're attempting to cover news.
Either way, look, you well research what you're talking about. You try and put in the different sides and explain what their viewpoints are. And you don't try and hide things. Like, you do not write a story about Poland, about how irrational Poland is being, and just ignore that Sweden, as far as I know, still has 13 Polish nationals held on what seem to be bogus terrorist charges. Right? If you're going to be condemning death threats of politicians, you just keep doing it. You do not suddenly tacitly support the assholes that are issuing threats for Donald Trump, no matter how horrible he is. It's consistency. If you're
Well,
going...
that may be logical consistency, but...
Well, fine. Logical consistency. If you're going to be the Hillary Clinton supporting paper, you just endorse Hillary Clinton.
Actually, that's not good enough.
It's not good enough, or...
No, it's not good enough. The fact is, even if you do decide to endorse a particular candidate, that does not excuse you from interposing yourself in your news coverage, from attempting to just report what the various sides believe in as unbiased a manner as you can.
Fair enough, yes.
No, consistency is bullshit. You have to attempt to limit your personal expression from news stories.
All right, fine. How about this? You try and show the evidence. You do not purposely try and obfuscate things to make the side you like really good and just ignore things. You have a duty to report it.
Well, yes. The argument on that, of course, is you can't report everything, and certain things and opinions aren't worth reporting. But the ideal is, yes, that you report the motivations of each side as they see them.
Yes, and yes, you can't report on everything. However, and that's why things like ethics is an art. However, you are supposed to report the most important things, like if, for example, the anti-Trump rally is causing minor scale looting and vandalism, that's something you actually report.
Yeah.
There is no justification for not reporting it. There's no way to argue that that part wasn't important.
No, you could definitely argue it.
Okay, you can argue everything, but still, it's clearly important to how you perceive the anti-Trump protesters in this instant. Just as it's important to report what is happening with Poland and Sweden, and not just act like Poland is just the government is completely irrational. Yeah. No, there's like, this is perhaps the thing that they have most been guilty of, is just omitting things that 10 years ago or rather recently, and to their readers, would be considered very important details.
No, it's not just very important details. They've omitted entire stories.
Yes. Admitted entire stories that the sides that they are tacitly supporting would make them look bad.
But anyway, on that note, I believe we are done for today.
All right. Well, let's sign off then.
Well, unless you have something else.
No, that's pretty much it. We've been in this topic to death a while ago.
All right. Good night and good luck.